Pro-choice activists protesting the leaked Supreme Court draft opinion on abortion staked outside the D.C. homes of conservative justices over the weekend. Their protests lasted into the night and were most intense outside the home of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. One activist told local news outlet WUSA 9, quote, "You don't get to take away my bodily autonomy and get to enjoy your Saturday at home. You can do one or the other."
Last week, GOP senators slammed Democratic leadership for, quote, enabling authoritarian tactics, calling out Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to make very clear to the American people that all threats and intimidation tactics against our Supreme Court justices are abhorrent. Fox News' Peter Doocy pressed White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on the personal targeting of Supreme Court justices. Let's wait for her response here.
Just about moving forward, these activists posted a map with the home addresses of the Supreme Court justices. Is that the kind of thing this president wants to help your side make their point?
Look, I think the president's view is that there's a lot of passion, a lot of fear, a lot of sadness from many, many people across this country about what they saw in that leaked document.
Joining us now to weigh in is culture editor at The Federalist and Rising Fridays co-host Emily Jashinsky. Emily, welcome to the show.
Good morning, guys.
What do you make of this? I mean, this activism happening now outside of the Supreme Court. I know this is probably the Supreme Court justices are dreading this. They're saying, "Oh my gosh, this is exactly why this leaked document should have never happened," because now we're being pressured to change our opinions. What do you think of that? What do you make of that?
Yeah, and it was a bad answer from Psaki, so much so that she actually sent out a statement in the form of a tweet earlier saying, violence or threats are not welcome. And it would have been easy enough to just say that the other day. I don't know why she didn't, but she at least walked it back. There was a piece in the New Yorker where they say a woman protesting the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade last Tuesday said she hoped, since the Supreme Court's opinion was still a draft, that, quote, if we really scare the shit out of them, they'll change their minds. And so I do think that's like explicitly the strategy here. And the reason that I think that should concern people is because there's a reason the Supreme Court is not litigating these questions, that this still happens behind closed doors after the oral arguments. And the reason that is because it's constitutionally set up to be a branch that is not subject to the whims of shifting public opinion in the country. And so if you think that's wrong, sure, that's one thing. But if you sort of are somebody who's complaining about democracy and, the Constitution and norms, then this should be alarming. And I would be alarmed if this went in the other direction, very much so. I mean, if this were conservatives showing up at the home of Sotomayor because something leaked I would be very concerned about that. It's subconsciously going to be in the mind of every justice and clerk as they're deciding these things in the future, what's going to leak, what's going to put their family in a difficult situation. So I think to that extent, if you are somebody who cares about norms and the Constitution sincerely, none of this is particularly good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is, and okay, let's be clear. People do have a right to gather in the road, the sidewalk is a public space, so they can do this. They can't make threats because no one can make threats of actual violence. So it is permissible. I just think it's a bad idea. I think it erodes kind of the fabric of civil society, which is exactly what the activists are trying to do. I mean, some of these quotes, one of the organizers at the Kavanaugh protest said, we're about to get doomsday, so I'm not going to be civil to that man at all. It's very provocative, inflammatory language, for the purpose of exactly as you said, trying to intimidate. And the court, and also, shouldn't the judiciary, or is it just a myth that they are outside the political process? Ideally, I think we're supposed to think of the Supreme Court and the judges as a little bit removed from the political process. So whereas it might be a different thing to protest a government official or a government spokesperson or an agent of the state, this isn't even that, because these are the people who are supposed to be impartial and a little bit immunized from the political process.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, there's sort of concerns on the right, if anything, that sort of Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Barrett are the ones who, if this is just a draft, they're the ones who might not sign on to the majority. And so it's almost an irony, but at the same time, you wonder if the folks on the left understand that, given the protests outside Justice Kavanaugh's house, because they are openly trying to scare the S out of him. And this is where it's going to go from here. The letter that I reported out in the Federalist last week about that was sent by Blackburn, Cruz, and Mike Lee was interesting because they call it Chuck Schumer for not tamping down calls for the end to the filibuster and court packing. And so on the one side, you have activists sort of gathering outside private homes and sharing the private addresses, which I think is particularly sort of a chilling thing to do. But secondly, there's going to be this question about norms on the other side. And in that letter, the senator said that's what dictators do. They change the rules when they don't get their way. But you can see how this is really going to heat up because of that question in particular, like what norms are worth preserving when, if you're on the left, this right to choose is on the line.
Oh, the hypocrisy. That's just what I think when I hear about this, because look, I mean, Chuck Schumer wanting to politicize the Supreme Court, getting the base galvanized to get them to want to vote for more Democrats in order to change the system, because look what happens if you don't. I mean, that is what conservatives have been doing for decades now, using the Supreme Court as the reason to get out there and to vote for us, right? It's get out there and vote because we want to change the court system, not make changes to the actual fundamental structure. I understand his criticism on the court packing issue or expanding the Supreme Court. I understand that, but it's still using the same sort of emotion out of the voter, right? Saying, we've got to do something. You have to vote for us. And liberals haven't done that very well over the years, right? Liberals have not used the Supreme Court the way conservatives have. But now suddenly liberals are. Now suddenly it's an issue that Democrats care about, and they're getting criticism for it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Oh, no, I was going to say it's a super interesting point, because a lot of people on the right don't think that has been successful. They say like Roe and Casey have been upheld by Republican appointed justices for a really long time in different cases. And so like antitrust law is a totally different question. There have been plenty of Republican appointed justices who have been great on that issue. On cultural issues, it's a different question. And the Supreme Court, to Robby's point, used to be a very different institution, and it is just completely political right now. And I think a lot of people would like to, get away from that and restore that sort of. But actually, Glenn Greenwald had a great post on his Substack last week where he was talking about how the judiciary in the Supreme Court is fundamentally anti-democratic. And so when people on the left are complaining that it's anti-democratic, you have to have some awareness that it is intentionally, constitutionally anti-democratic. It is one of the mechanisms that the founders put in place to sort of deal with and temper when at times they saw as excesses of sort of democratic rule. So it just, when we come to it with that understanding of what the Supreme Court is supposed to do, you just see how far away we've gotten from it. And neither side is satisfied, which I think is a really interesting point, Kim.
Well, and to what you just said, getting rid of Roe v. Wade and returning this issue to the states would be, you might disagree with it, but it is you can't disagree that it's the pro-democracy move, is to let democratically elected legislators in various states chart different courses on abortion that align with the values of the citizens of that state. Maybe in some states that's very little access to abortion. In some states that's complete access to abortion. In some states maybe it's restrictions after a certain time period. And like why is that wrong to do from the progressive standpoint, where democracy, we want more democracy. How dare the Republicans erode our democracy? Okay, here's more democracy. People, the people and their representatives can decide for themselves in their various states, and yet this principle is being attacked.
Well,
yeah,
because
I think for people.
Sorry, democracy, just coming from the more the progressive side, but people like democracy. Okay, I get your point. Sure, it is more democratic, I suppose, to allow states to vote on whether or not they want to have slaves, whether or not they want to continue that practice, whether or not they want to force people to do XYZ thing. Sure, I guess it's democratic to allow that, but it's still antithetical to individual freedom. And I think that is where the stance comes from, is that it is the crowd, the mob mentality, the mob majority going and ripping away individual freedom from a person that is the problem with it. And that is why, as Emily just mentioned, the Supreme Court is in place as an anti-democratic institution to counter when the people get that mob mentality and want to rip rights away from individuals. That is the point of the Supreme Court. So they're meant to protect the individual from this sort of authoritarian tyranny. And that's
all I want the left to admit, that there's such a thing as individual rights, and some things shouldn't be put to a vote, and it's not rah-rah democracy all the time. And if I could get that kind of admission from the left, I could go home happy.
Well, and that's the point, and that's what I think the thing is, because Kim is right, and then at the same time, it's like, these are people who are constantly crying about norms and democracy. And I think a lot of people who grew up, after Roe was considered settled law, that was sort of the phrase that we heard over and over again, settled law, didn't realize how fragile Roe was. And Ryan and I talked about this on Friday. And I think Ryan disagreed with what I said, but Roe has always been very fragile, just sort of in terms of the legal standing of the ruling. Like it has always been questioned by liberals from Ruth Bader Ginsburg to Lawrence Tribe. It found this right in the 14th Amendment, and it just didn't do a very sound job logically deriving it from that. So it's always actually been on shaky ground. And I think people didn't realize that. And so I feel like since the opinion leaked last week, we've just seen that there's actually just not a whole lot of, I think, understanding of how the system of abortion in the country has worked over the last several decades, and sort of also at how it fits into the system in general, like how the court's supposed to work, how federalism is supposed to work. And I'm glad, actually, if there's a silver lining, it's that we're having this nuanced sort of conversation right now. But yes, the folks who are crying about democracy and norms for forever, this is how the Republican system of government that we have it is how it works. You toss these questions back to the states. But, and Kim, the last thing I would say is that that's where this all comes down to, is the question of whether we are talking about a fundamental freedom or a fundamental right to life. And settling that question is a really, obviously a very difficult thing to do.
I don't want to hear my body, my choice anymore from the people who wanted to require vaccination, who are masking toddlers. It's yes. Let that one go. You lost that. So, Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
And our rising panel will be with us next to discuss the Republicans' counter to Democrats' effort to protect Roe. Stick around for that.